Hi there. It's Friday afternoon, about 6 o'clock on the 16th of September 2022. And this is episode 11 of One Walk 1000 Testimonies. Now, I told you at the beginning, these would not be in chronological order. This one's about the third time God spoke out loud to me. Now, the first time in episode 1, I talked about when God spoke out loud to me as a 6-year-old after a terrible accident, praying, God, I don't want to die, and him putting his hands on my shoulder and saying, I'm right here, out loud, and then carrying me onto the couch, this bleeding young, my face bleeding young boy, and cradled me in his arms until my mother came home and took me to the hospital. And that was the most peaceful time I'd ever known in my life. And from that moment on, I knew God was real. And I no longer had to say, I believe in God, because I knew he was a real thing. And then in the second time God spoke to me, and this is in episode 5 of One Walk 1000 Testimonies, I was in my 20s and had strayed for a while, working, trying to be a rock star, and God came to me again and said, I'm still here. And you listen to that episode, it's pretty interesting. But in this one, and I have to set this up. This is a long story that leads up to why God spoke to me the third time. And when I was young, 17 and in high school, those were great years, but I was still painfully shy, except on stage when I was singing that, and that's just a persona, that's not something you can do in real life, because it just doesn't work out that way. Turn this up a little bit. But I was a good looking kid, and I got pictures here. We can show you pictures. See, there I am. That's me at just turned 18. You can see I'm, classic 70s. I mean, there's a Aerosmith belt buckle, and if you look real close up around the neck, I'm wearing puka shell necklace. This is in California, and that's what people did. Anyways, that was me back then, and I had a lot of fun. Had some bands in high school, played some of the dances and stuff, and had some good friends, good Christian friends, and it was a good time. And the thing back in when you were in high school in the 70s, there was no internet, there were no cell phones. We didn't even dream of stuff like that. They didn't even have pagers then. When the high school pictures came out, people would get sheets of the little 2 by 3.5 inch wallet photos. They were called wallet photos, and the girls and the guys would all exchange those, and people carried little books with all the you could go through them. And at the time, I was really good at making friends that were girls. Okay, platonic, because they knew I was safe. Was not good at making girlfriends. I just couldn't cross that threshold into that point. Well, I was looking for a girlfriend because I never stopped looking. I had a few dates and stuff and had some fun. But at one end, in the band I was in at the time, just kid friends from school. It was just a little school band. We had a lot of fun. But my best friend, Bill, his girlfriend at the time, had her book of the little pictures, and she went to a different school, okay, and a different school over on the other side of town. And I was just flipping through her wallet photos of all her friends, and I came across this pretty little blonde thing, and blonde hair, blue eyes. And man, she's pretty. I said, I'd like to meet her. Can you set it up? She says, oh yeah, that's Danny. We can set that up. So, and what we did was, so her name was Danelle. They called her Danny. And she sang in an a cappella choir at her high school. And she was a mezzo soprano, had an amazing voice. and she says she doesn't have a lot of friends. She's kind of, she's very outgoing. She's just, got some stuff going on. So I say, well, let's meet her. So what we did was we had the girl went over to Danny and told her, I'm in this band and we're looking for another singer. Would you like to try out for this band? We play parties and do Christian stuff and pray and stuff like that. And it's just say, yeah. So she came over, and we had all set this up. Okay, nobody. I mean, we knew if she couldn't sing away out of a bag, we were going to put her in the band anyways, because I liked her. Turns out she was a great singer, and yeah, I joined the band. So now we had two female singers, which we had, and to have, the thing at the bands at the time was the three singers, but we had two, so we were doing good. And we did a lot of hits of the day, and the girls sang a lot of songs, and we played parties and had a lot of fun. And, I got to know Danny real well. I did tell her years later that, the whole band audition thing was set up, because I just wanted to meet her, and, she didn't mind. We laughed about that, for a long time. But, anyways, life went on, and we dated for about 4 years, and when we were 21, we got married. February 21st, 1981. We wanted to be on Valentine's Day, but we couldn't, church wasn't available, so we took the week after that, and that's how it ended up being that date. And as we got married and started our life, and, bands moved on. My friend became a sheriff's deputy and moved away. And, I started joining and playing around with different bands around the LA area, because there was thousands of them down there. And that was, my thing. I have another picture thing. Okay. And this is me in 1986. All my equipment, was all the hair and the bad looking dude and the beard and everything. Still not a bad looking guy. All in all. In fact, a lot of this equipment, from 86 that I started collecting, I still have most of that equipment. In fact, you could see right back in that corner, you could see one of them speakers from 1986 is sitting right back in that corner, and it's sitting on top of one of those brown speakers there. But, so, some things you never do give up. So I was doing that. I was working and, playing with bands on the weekends and, practicing a couple nights a week. And in 1992, shortly after that, all that trying, God pulled me out of that, and he pulled me aside and said, I want you to step out of that persona. Stop trying to be a rock star. I was even trying to be a Christian, contemporary Christian music. I wasn't even trying to do rock music anymore. But he said, I want you to step away from that, and I want you to be a worship leader. And I'm like, worship leader? And, I struggled with that. I cried over that, because I had spent my whole life trying to become that musician. But I listened to God, and he says, I want you to do this. I'm like, okay, go to churches. I will send you to a church, and they will put you on the worship team until you reach, when you reach one person, there'll be one person I want you to reach in each one of these churches, and then it'll be time to move on to the next church. And I did this, okay? And he says, I got to tell you, it pays nothing, but the rewards are great. Sounds good. So I started doing this, and there's a great story in one of the episodes. I forget the number, but look up Charlie Performs a Miracle. It's one of these testimonies. And it tells you just what God was doing through God, and it was amazing. And I have a bunch of these, I have to put together and put online yet. But that's what I was doing. Okay? And back to that was the sub story. Back to the rest of it. I love computers. I had spent a long time as a compressor mechanic. But I loved computers, and I finally got into computers, and I was able to get into the computer field, and I did that basically ever since. That and construction work and whatever musician can do for a day job. But life went on, and we worked and struggled, and had 2 kids, and struggled to feed them. And my life revolved around my kids. Once my kids were born, my life was all about my kids, because when I was growing up, my parents, I love them, they didn't pay a lot of attention to me. And that turns you into backwards. That's how you become the backwards shy person. But anyways, I was doing that, and my wife Danny was working. She was she had gone to college. She was a year ahead of me, so she was in her first year of college when I was still in high school. But she had a special gift with young children. So she got a degree in early childhood development and became a preschool director, not a teacher, even though she did teach, but she was the director of the whole school. And she could do stuff with kids that was just absolutely amazing. And that's what she did. It didn't pay a lot, but we both worked, tried to pay the rent had a nice home, and raising our kids in this nice home, in this nice neighborhood. I gave up a lot of other stuff to have a nicer home, drove old cars, didn't shop extensively, just it took both of us to pay the rent on this place. But the kids were happy there. And, this went on for, quite a while. We was going to churches and having parties. We'd have people over, and Spaghetti Miracle happened during this time. That's another episode you can watch. But she, and she had a real gift for little kids. In fact, one of the churches we went to, at the time, I was there for another mission, one of the churches God sent me to on the worship team. And it was in an old brick cinder block warehouse, a big one. And it was, they had a nice sanctuary at the one end, and it was a series of rooms, with hallway, with a big parking lot out front. And and it was one of the Calvary Chapel franchises, I think. That was a great church back in the day. But I was there, and they had the young kids in the room next door, and you could always hear them screaming and yelling and playing around, and it was just like a big babysitting service over there. And, the church said, man, we need somebody to control these kids. And my wife stepped up and said, I'll do that. And so she did. And it went on, and so she started during the service. She would, step out and she would take care of the 2 to 4 year olds. And there was like 35 of them. There was a lot of them there. And after a couple of weeks, we noticed during the service we couldn't hear anything anymore. So somebody peeked in, and we saw all these kids sitting in little chairs, like 3 rows of chairs, hands folded, and they were just listening with rapt attention on every word that Danny was saying, because that was her gift. And it turned out, she played a little guitar too, so she took one of my guitars and she started singing with these kids. And and after a couple months, the kids got to where they were singing so loud. At first we were going, man, that's special, and praise God, and listen to those kids praising God, and it was really special. But after a while, it got so loud that we actually had to move them down to the other end of the building because the 2-year-olds were out singing the adults. Nobody wanted to admit that. But anyways, this happened, and it was great. And, you know, allergies. Man. But at 91, my wife got pregnant with our third child. And during that time, there was this big push for people to work from home and all the pleasures and don't drive and all this stuff. And that really appealed to her. You know, I had a bad feeling about it, but it really appealed to her. And at the time, you know, I wasn't as strong as I should have been, you know, or I wouldn't. I just wanted to let her do it. But she quit her job as a preschool director and went back to school. And, you know, with the help of her parents, you know, her dad helped pay for it. She went to school for medical transcription. That's where you sit at home and you wear headphones and you listen to the little tapes that the doctor has put out all these reports about all these patients, and you would transcribe that onto the computer into a word processing program. And she went to the school, and she absolutely excelled at this. In fact, she typed, you know, she was typing at 140 words a minute with no mistakes. I mean, that's just unheard of. And one of the people in this medical transcription course worked for a large cardiologist's office. And she says, man, you're amazing. I'd love to have you. So she had a job before she even graduated from the school. So, I mean, she was good at it, but she was a real smart, you know, she was a smart person. So she started transcribing at home with the little baby. You know, I have a picture. I'll show you. There's that little baby. This was January 24th, 1992. And I had just come from a wedding. You know, he was born there. There was it was June 24th is when he was born. Well, this was June 25th when this was taken. I had a wedding on June 24th. And I was there for most of the, maybe the wedding was whenever the wedding was. The wedding and reception was June 25th. So I had gone to a wedding, and you see, still had the hair, you know. I had a full beard at the time, and you know, there's Ethan, my little son, and I had stayed at the reception as long as I could. I was the best man. I mean, he asked me to be the best man, and I was proud to do it. But, you know, after a while, I said, man, I got to go. I want to see my baby. I want to see my wife. You know, I got a brand new baby waiting for me. So he said, all right, go. And, you know, we hugged and blessed each other. I said, you know, have a good time in Hawaii. Went off, and, you know, and one of the nurses snapped this picture when I was holding my baby. You know, those were the days. I don't know how I got all that hair. I'd like to have some of that hair back. But anyways, he was born, and she was at home, just her and the baby, typing. Now, you got to remember my wife, I got to tell you about it. She was an extrovert. She was very outgoing. She loved being with groups, you know, and loved the social interaction. I was very shy and backwards. We were opposites. That's why we attracted so well. In fact, all the Bible studies, all the barbecues, and the spaghetti miracle, which was another episode, you know, happened because of her outgoing nature and loving to have people over and stuff. I never was any good at that. But we did that and all that stuff. But during the week, she went from, you know, being outgoing, a preschool director, spending all day with all these kids, and kids are happy. Little kids, little toddlers are happy. Everything is sunshine and bunny rabbits, and it's just easy for her to be happy in a situation like that. And she was, all the teachers, and she was like, very much like the principal of a school, but she was a preschool director, and she was always in with the classes and the kids, and my kids went to their, we never needed childcare because, both my kids grew up in the preschool, and they grew up in that social environment, so they were really good at socializing and stuff. My third son, not so much, because he sat at home just with his mom. So she went from this happy, outgoing, atmosphere that fed her, to sitting at home alone with headphones on, listening to doctors talk about their patients. And it was a cardiologist's office, and they were not good. So she went from happiness and sunshine and bunny rabbits to typing and listening all day to stories about death and heart issues and heart attacks and cardiologists and atrial fibrillation and just nothing but sad stories. Constant sadness and death. And that changes a person, And I saw her changing, and I'm like, honey, you're changing. I mean, you're not happy, I know you put a lot of money and work into this, but it's not good for you, And Ethan was being raised. I mean, he wasn't happy and social and outgoing, like my other two, my daughter and son. In fact, he turned out very much like me, and we'll tell you why about that in a bit here. But she started losing sleep. She got to where she couldn't sleep, and she didn't know why she couldn't sleep. She just was having a hard time sleeping, and it got so bad that she eventually went to our doctor. It wasn't our doctor. She went to some other doctor that the insurance paid for. And, told her I can't sleep. And the doctor instantly, and if you know doctors are in business to sell medicine, to sell drugs, because they get paid for that. And this doctor said, well, maybe you're depressed. Do you think you're depressed? She goes, I don't know, maybe. He goes, yeah, I think that. Try this. We have this drug out now. It's called Prozac. I never liked Prozac. I don't like what it does to people. I don't like what any of those psychotropic endomorphic drugs do to people, because it's been proven. And the story just came out yesterday here in 2022. They're just finding out that all these drugs actually made these problems worse. And that story's going to get big real quick, because a lot of people, they made a lot of money selling this stuff to people that doesn't do anything but make things worse. So I watched my wife go from a vibrant in person to this empty shell. Depressed, because the doctor told her she was depressed. She was depressed. And since she was in the medical field, I mean, doctors are like gods, and, they could do no wrong. I've always thought, they're just people. But anyway, she was taking Prozac, and that was the beginning of the end, And it wasn't helping. It was making things worse, because that's what those kind of things do. So she started looking around for a psychiatrist, Now, we had Christian counselors. I had been through a lot of Christian counseling, through things in my upbringing that I'm not ready to talk about yet. And none of those counselors told her what she wanted to hear, They wanted to tell her about getting right with God and getting back into God's walk, and she didn't want to hear that. Danny had always had self-esteem issues since she was little. She was never the skinniest kid in school. You know, her parents were very old when she was born. Her parents were in their late 40s when she was born, so she came along really late. And the psychiatrist, she finally found a psychiatrist that told her what she wanted to hear. That would find. She wanted to blame somebody else for the problem she was bringing on herself. And you can do that all you want, but it's not going to change anything. And like I said, she had always had problems with self-esteem. She was never as skinny as she wanted to be, and her hair wasn't right, and it was always something. But I never saw any of that, because I told her in the beginning, I'm not looking for a beauty queen. I've seen what they do. I'm looking for somebody with brains and heart. I love smart girls. With hearts. I love a girl that will cry at a movie and will cry at a sad story, and frankly cry at one of my love songs that I used to write back in the day. And she did all that, but wasn't good enough for her. So she just got deeper and deeper into her depression. And I'm looking at my notes here. And she finally found this Jewish psychiatrist. I think he was in it for the money. I don't know what it was, but I think her insurance was paying for it, and her parents were helping out. And he would tell her anything she wanted to hear. Oh, nope, it can't be your fault. It must be somebody else's fault. So she had, in her mind, she had this big long list of people to blame for her problems. And they got around to, well, it must be something from your youth. Your parents did something to you. So she decided, yeah, it's my parents' fault, so I'm going to blame my parents. So she called up her mom and just tore her mom apart. You did this and you didn't raise me right, and it's all your fault. And, it broke her mother's heart. And, I knew her parents. We had been together for a long time. We dated for 4 years and then got married. And, even while we were dating, she was off to college in another town, so she wasn't around a lot. I would go over in the afternoons when I was a teenager and just hang out with her mom, her mom was, like 40 years older than me, but, I loved her. She became my mom, and we were very close. And her dad was a mechanic. He was an air compressor mechanic, and he fixed up, most of his work was done out in his garage. And he had 2 older boys. My wife had a brother that was 8 years older and a brother that was 16 years older than her. So she came along really late. And these boys were both, they went to college and they were professionals and suits and ties kind of a thing. And he was a mechanic, and, my dad was a mechanic, so I had the aptitude. So I hung out a lot with that, and he taught me a trade, and I was in that trade for a long time. And I became very close with her parents. And then her parents weren't that way, And I knew it was only a matter of time before she moved on to somebody else. But this went on for years and didn't work. So back to the psychiatrist, and went through cutting different people. Again, she lost a lot of friendships and stuff, from always looking to blame somebody else for the problems that she brought on herself. And, it was only a matter of time. I knew in my head it was only a matter of time till she got to me. And she would eventually. She finally got so bad she checked herself into a hospital. They had a mental hospital out there, and she checked herself in and was staying there and was so depressed. And, she drew a picture of herself in this hole that she couldn't climb out of. And that's me. I can't get out of this hole. And there's one time before that, it drove her to, after that, she was in and out a lot. And she had gotten depressed, and she had taken off in my truck. And I had this gold Dodge Dakota, and it was the only one in town, very easily recognized. And everybody knew my truck. So she was taken off, and I couldn't find her. I didn't know where I was afraid she was going to drive off a bridge or something because she was in that condition. So I was calling all our church friends and everybody I knew around town, and I was asking them, have you seen my truck going down the road anywhere? Because if I'd have said, have you seen my wife? They were like, I don't know. My wife drove a minivan most of the time. And nobody saw it. And, eventually, when we did find her, she didn't come home. She heard the story from the friends, and that's when everything fell apart. Because she was absolutely convinced that I cared more about that truck than I did about my wife. And of course, it wasn't true. He said, "Oh, you care about your truck? You were calling everybody asking them if they'd seen your stupid truck." I said, "Well, it's the easiest thing to recognize, If I asked them, did you see my wife? No, I don't know, I've seen your wife, or what was she in, So it was easier to ask people, have you seen my truck going down the road? Because they would, oh, yeah, I saw your truck. Nobody did. But anyways, she convinced herself that I didn't care about her and only cared about that stupid truck, I eventually gave that truck to my daughter. And that put her back in the hospital. And while she was in the hospital, and I was going to see her every day after work, so I would get home late. I would go there during my lunch hours. And through that whole time, my daughter, she was 14 at the time, I think, 13, 14, maybe a little older. She was taking care of the boys. She was doing the laundry. She was cleaning the house. She was going to school full time, keeping a 4.0 grade average and going to school, making the dinners, She would even do the grocery shopping. It's like, she was amazing. She kept that house together. She really came through. God bless that little girl. Anyways, my wife eventually came home, and we were working on it, and I thought things were, going pretty good. And we had gone to one of those New Year's Eve nights out where they still have them today, where they'll close the street off in a little town, in this little town where we lived in. It's called Roanoke Park, California, up in Northern California. And we took the kids and had a great time, He's walking up and down the streets and, talking to friends. And it was just a good time. Well, January 1st, it was a holiday, and went, sitting at home in the morning. And she walks into the living room with 2 suitcases in her hand. She says, "I'm leaving now." What? What do you mean you're leaving now? I thought we were putting things back together. We were doing good. And she's like, "No, I can't take this anymore. I'm leaving." And my daughter had known about it because my daughter went with her. Turns out, a couple of weeks before, she had conspired with one of the people in the church we were going to, and they had rented her this little place they had out behind their house. It was a converted garage. They converted into this nice little apartment. So she had been planning this for a while. And Carrie went with her, my daughter, Caroline, and she took our little boy at the time. He was only 5 years old, I think, 5.5. And Tim stayed with me. Tim was my son, and he would never leave me. He was my rock. So I spent a long time, and I thought she would come back. Okay, my wife had done this 4 or 5 times during our 20 years together. So I thought, well, she'll be back eventually. So I worked real hard and worked on the weekends trying to pay the rent on this home. It took 2 of us to make the rent on this house because it was a nicer home. And, one person on one salary just couldn't pay the rent. And in California, the rents are expensive. You can't buy a house in California because the rents are just too much money. But she never did come back. And she never did see her own issues. She spent her life and went from blaming people to finding sicknesses And, she found everything with the syndrome on the end. It's just my syndrome. And we go to support groups for this syndrome. One of them is called myositis. I don't even know what that is. And she spent the rest of her life looking for a sickness to blame on her problem. And it eventually killed her. She died here about 5 years ago. Kind of wish I'd have gone to see her, but I never did. But I was, that's here recent, but back then, it was 1990. It was 1999 when she left. And after a while, they just couldn't afford the house anymore. I was selling things. I was, selling an old car I was working on. Sold another car that my son and I were building. Computers, so all my tools. I'd gotten into computers, and so I had this big toolbox, and I sold it, and anything I could do to pay the rent to keep that place. Thinking she would come back. And when I couldn't afford it, I finally, I had to move in. I found a guy on the other side of town, an old veteran that was renting a couple rooms out in his house. So I rented both of these rooms. It was $300 a month for 2 rooms, and my son and I moved into there. And I bought a set of bunk beds, and, we slept in the bunk beds. In the other room, I had my computer, and that's, where we lived and did our stuff, because, I didn't want to hang out with the old veteran. He was a little weird. But that's a different story altogether. So we did that, but I remember when I was moving stuff out of the house, and I always left the house cleaner than I was. I did construction on the side, so I always left the house cleaner than I found it. And I was walking through this house in the empty rooms and thinking about all the love that had been in this house, and my children that had grown up in this house, and the Christmases around the fireplace, and the spaghetti miracles, and the Bible studies, and the barbecues, and all the life that was in that house. And now it was empty. And that's when I broke. I realized a family is a living, breathing unit. It's not mom, dad, and kids. A family has its own life. And you can kill that family. You can kill that living, breathing entity. And she killed that. And I knew at that time that family was lost. That family was dead. And I was grieving the death of that family. I had found myself huddled up in a corner, back against the corner of a wall, in the old family room of this empty house, sitting on the floor, hugging my knees and crying into my own arms, weeping for this dead family. And I finally screamed out in my tears. I said, God, I'm all alone. Because I never wanted to be alone. I said, till death do us part, and man, I meant it. And that's the third time God spoke to me. He put his arms around me from behind, and I'm sitting against the wall, and he just reached his arms around and put his arms around me. And he said out loud, I'm still here. And I just lost it. God hugged me. I felt God's head was on my shoulder, and I felt his head on my shoulder. I felt God's tears rolling down my neck. God's tears crying with me. I've had a lot of people in my walk, saying, God doesn't cry. I'm like, we're created in God's image. If we cry, you don't think he can cry? Anything we do, he does better. And I sat there for, what seemed like forever with God's arms around me, weeping together. And again, you will never feel peace like you will when God is holding you. I'm still here. The third time he said that to me, I'm still here. So, life goes on. I eventually moved to Ohio. My parents lived in Ohio, in a little house in Columbus. And I moved into their room. It just got to where I couldn't handle life in California. It was just too expensive for one person to live out there, when you're not a professional. So, and I had no college degree or anything. So, California's a college state. If you want to get anywhere, you have to have a degree in California. So I moved in with my parents, and I had my computer, in the little bedroom. And I found this site online. The internet was a big thing, by then. And I found this site called ChristianMatchmaker.com. And it was very big, at the, 98, 99, 2000. And they had a couple 100,000 people on there. And it's very much like they kind of set up the Matchmaker.com became a huge site. But, they had their profiles and all about yourself. And they had a way of asking questions to find out what your personality type was. And then they would match you up with people. And I was just sitting in the evening, flipping through pictures. And I saw this picture of this girl that just stopped me dead in my tracks. And I looked into those eyes and I was captivated. I stared at those eyes for like 20 minutes before I did anything, and I had to shake myself out of it. And I wrote to this girl, man, I gotta meet you. Hi. I said, I was very adamant that, I was not looking for a lover. I'm not looking for a girlfriend. I'm just looking for a friend to talk to. So I sent her this message, and I got back something the next day, said account closed. I'm like, oh. I was crushed. So I talked to the admin, and they had a thing back then, and you could get 2 weeks for free. And she was one of those. She had gotten on for the 2 weeks for free, and her 2 weeks had expired, so they just, but the account was still up there, but, she couldn't talk or answer it or anything. So I wrote to the admin, and being an IT guy in Columbus, I knew the right places to look and where to go and, who to write to. So, and this girl that was the admin of the site, I said, man, you got to give her some more time. So I'll pay for it if I have to, but I got to meet this girl. And she felt a tug. It was a Christian site, so she felt a tug. So she goes, you know what? I'm going to give her an account. No charge. So I wrote to her, and it, ended up in her email. And, one thing led to another, and we started talking. It could have been partly me because I was not looking for a girlfriend. I was just being honest. I told her, and, and after my wife had left in 99, that summer of 99, I did some stupid stuff. Didn't get in trouble, but I committed some sins and did some stupid stuff. Trying to get the pain to go away. Even though God was there, I thought, well, this is God's will for this and this and this, and it wasn't. But, and I told her all this stuff that I had done, and she was like, oh, how could you, but she wasn't mad at me, because we weren't lovers, we were just friends, and I told her that, and it was okay. Not okay that you'd committed sins, but it's good that you're confessing it. And I had a little bit about myself during this time. When I was in counseling, Bob Benson, who was a huge Christian artist at the time, had a lot of hits out. And he wrote a song, and one of the verses just identified with me. Where he talks about his life, and he had a life very similar to mine. And he's talking about all the broken pieces of his life. And he said, and these are his words, he goes, I picked up all these pieces and I built a strong deception and I locked myself inside of it for my own protection. Now I sit alone inside myself and curse. Sit alone inside myself and curse my company, for this thing that has kept me alive for so long is now killing me. And that's a great song. It's called Lord of the Past by Bob Benson. And I had a wall. Nobody got in my wall. And I was talking with this girl online. We had been talking for a while, and we could get very ethereal in our talk. She was a Christian, I was a Christian, and I told her, and she could see into my dreams for some reason. And I said, you're in my garden. And she said 2 words that changed my life forever. And it was just 2 words that told me she was a person I was meant to spend the rest of my life with. I asked her one time, you're in my garden. She says, yes, I'm in your garden. I said, how did you get through my wall? And the 2 words she said was, what wall? That was it. She walked right through. The walls came down. One person can have that effect on somebody if God puts that person in your life. Anyway, we kept talking, and we finally did meet. I was living in Columbus, and she lived in a little town called Salem, which is in northeast Ohio, about 175 miles. So it was a good 2.5 hour drive. But I started looking around up there, and I found a little computer store that was looking for a manager. So I called him up, and one thing led to another, and I became the manager of this little computer store. It was, and she was like, she lived out in the country, and this is in town, and so it's a 15-minute drive. But she wouldn't meet me, until the right time. Even though I was madly in love with her, and I know she loved me too, but she was a lady, and she had what I wanted, brains and a heart, cried anything, just perfect. And at the time, this was in the fall. It was in the spring of 2000. We've been talking since like January of 2000. And she wouldn't meet me. And through this whole time, the reason she wouldn't meet me is my divorce wasn't final. Because I had made a vow to God, and I would not sign the divorce papers. My now ex-wife had, filed the papers, and I had been served the papers, but I said, no, I'm not signing this. I made a vow to God till death do us part, and you left me, I didn't leave you, and I wouldn't sign them. And she eventually got the divorce without me signing the papers. And when that was finally done, I was still talking to my new friend that I had since fallen madly in love with. And she eventually agreed to see me, and it was one evening on April 7th of 2000. That day's burned into my memory. A blind date, best date of my life. And I wrote a song about that, and one of these days I'll put that song online. But we kept dating, and eventually we were married in February of 2021, or in February of 2001. And settled down into life. I'm still married to her today. We're much older. It's been 22 years. I've been with her longer than I was with my first wife, who left me. She had also had a husband who had left her after 25 years of marriage, and he just left. He wasn't a spiritual Christian man, so he just, he just left her. Just got tired of the situation and abandoned her, So neither one of us in our minds weren't living in any kind of sin by getting remarried. But we're still married today, and we're happy. And the delight of my life, what brings me more joy than anything else, is nurturing and taking care of my wife. The one who didn't see the wall and walked right through it. And that's it. It's the third time God spoke to me. I told you it was a long story. But if you're faithful, God will never leave you. If you're unfaithful, God will never leave you. He's always there. And God is good all the time. I'll see you next time. Love God. Keep your coffee warm.